We just have a question for you about the site. Are you 100% positive that Bella and Celeste are in these tanks? How did you get them in the tanks? 'Cause
The hatch on top.
the hatch, how do you access that?
Walk upstairs.
And then what?
Open it.
So they were saying like you could barely fit an arm through that.
It's a
How big is
hatch.
it?
It's like, you can use, that's how we gauge the tanks.
So you think it's about like, just like a pot, or a, what's that thing on the ground of the street?
Like a manhole?
Like a manhole cover, like is it that big?
It's not that big, no.
Okay. Was it hard to get them in there? Did you have to push or anything, or?
Not really.
Okay. We're sure, you're
Yeah,
sure?
yeah, yes.
Okay, like we're gonna have to drain these tanks, it's gonna be kind of
Okay.
a mess, so I just wanna make sure that you're being truthful about that. And is it because, is Shanann here because she couldn't, like, could you not lift her all the way up there, or you couldn't? Would she have been too big to fit in that hole? Did you know that already?
Not just from working the whole field and then I do that.
Okay. And the girls aren't gonna be with her in this?
Or down here?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Do you really think this just blew from wherever that was? Okay.
It's very open area, very susceptible to windstorms and everything else. There's no trees, nothing protecting that area from storms coming through, tornadoes, anything like that.
Okay. Okay. Well, when we drain these, they're both gonna be in each one. One's gonna be in each one. Okay. How do you drain it?
There's a backside valve. It's a 2-inch balon, drains to the pit. It's right there.
Oh, they can just drain it off? Will they both fit, all the stuff that's in there, fit in there?
I'm not sure how much fluid's in those tanks.
Did they drop down? Like, could you hear them drop? Like, did it seem like they dropped a ways?
One seemed emptier than the other,
Which one do you think?
to the left one.
The one that Bella's in?
Mhm.
I mean, did it sound like she would have hit the bottom kind of thing, or did you hear her hit liquid? There's no chance that you put them in there when they're still alive,
No,
is
God,
there?
no, God, no, God, no.
Okay. I mean, they would be able to tell that because they would get fluid in their lungs and stuff like that, so I just want to make sure, you know.
There's no chance.
Okay. Okay. Are there going to be, you know, when they look at Bella and Celeste, are there going to be any, like, resuscitation marks on them or anything?
Like from CPR or something.
Do you know CPR?
I've taken it to work once
Okay.
in class 2 years ago.
Okay.
It was on like a full-sized adult dummy type thing.
Okay.
I wouldn't know how much to push on a child besides.
But they were already gone until you
They were
didn't
gone,
do
they were
CPR?
gone.
Okay. So no CPR?
No.
Okay.
And you knew Bella was gone. Did you go check on her afterwards? All of it happened? And then what did she look like compared to Cece?
Same, blue in the face and just not moving. Didn't hear anything as far as pulse or a beat or anything.
Okay. Any other questions or things you want to tell us?
Grandma's gonna tell me what's gonna happen next.
Not quite sure yet. It might be a few more minutes before we know. So give us a few more minutes.
What did you?
I don't think so.
Do you want to maybe have water, do you like the Gatorade or anything?
No, thank you.
Are you hungry at all?
Just some pizza?
I feel bad eating any of your food. But
No, it's fine. What kind of pizza do you like?
It doesn't matter really.
Okay.
Just whatever. Thank you though.
Sometimes they just stay here at night, and other ones they go to jail tonight, so I don't know which one it says. And I forgot about lawyer. Where's Craig at that? I don't know what he's gonna call me. Craig, he was telling me about the lawyer situation and stuff. So they can do a court appointed lawyer, it's up to the judge first, they gotta see what you charge with, whatever, and all that type of stuff now. How everything goes. Did you talk to anybody, prosecutors, all that stuff? Just tell you.
Everybody's seen.
Well, wherever you at, I'll find you tomorrow, so you can see you.
Okay.
So they took Alexis, so we're at the hotel somewhere. So
They took it?
Yeah. The second detectives I talked to said your story changed a couple times. Things, what we're doing and type stuff. And you say, you seen the monitor, was it in the kitchen or was it upstairs? It was upstairs, okay, I thought you said kitchen, okay. I love you, though, no matter what we're thinking of that. Anybody loves you, Jimmy loves you. Everybody loves you.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. I'm sure you'll agree that the footage we've just watched is very sobering. It's very simple, just the fabric of the well site and the surrounding areas, the sort of tawny grass and nothingness just out there, and how that stands in stark contrast to the vividness, the vitality, the color of Thrive and the sort of fabric of the Watts family in Frederick. Here it's just sort of monotonous, monotone, one color, not much going on. And when you look at that footage, I think many of us have looked at it, you tend to just see the fracking pad, you see the 2 tanks and not much else. But actually, there is quite a lot besides that. There's the fitted sheet, there is the 2 black plastic bags, there's also a rake handle and rake head that was snapped in 2 and left at the well site as well. In this episode, we're going to look a little bit more deeply at the forensic side of the well site at Cervi 319. We're going to look at the evidence, what was found on the side of one of the thief hatches. We're going to look at the drive there. We're going to look at the type of soil that the grave was dug out of. We're going to look at the exact location of the fitted sheet. We're going to look at the fact that Watts did a pressure test and what that means. We're going to look at the sort of prevailing narrative that the children couldn't have been sedated, and Shanann as well, or there couldn't have been any chemicals because it's not in the autopsy, and we're going to talk about that briefly. And then we're also going to look at the drone footage a second time, with all of this information in mind. We're also going to examine the grave, which is, I think a lot of people have not noticed this. It's just that there's actually an impression of the body to some extent in the sand. And then we're also going to look at the first witnesses on the scene and what they said when they arrived about Chris Watts. But we're going to start with line of sight at Cervi 319. Before we get to that though, let's just deal with the 3 questions raised in the previous episode. If you answered grey, the color of Chris Watts' truck was grey. If you said that Shanann was wearing jeans, and if you said that Shanann's shirt was had like a silver heart on it and it was recovered, then you would have been wrong on all 3 questions. And I do think, and this is discussed on Patreon, I do think a lot is revealed. There's a lot of insight to first of all, the fact that the shirts were changed, but second of all, the shirt that Shanann was wearing in has never been recovered. Why do you think that is? So the question for this episode is, how long would it take to get from 2825 Saratoga Trail to the GPS coordinates at Roggan, at the well site at Cervi 319, right? And how long did it take Watts to get back from that position after Nicole Atkinson told him about what was going on at his home and he said he was on his way? Before we get started, I want to thank the 20,000 or so subscribers who've subscribed to True Crime Rocket Science. Welcome. And I also want to encourage you, if you're enjoying the content on this channel, to head on over to Patreon. I'm uploading narrated audiobook chapters of the 9-book series that I wrote. As we speak, currently working on completing the Drilling Through Discovery audiobook. I'm already at chapter 13. If you're enjoying the content on this channel, please like, share, leave a comment. If you do share, please use the hashtag TCRS. And let's get started. So we're going to start with line of sight at Cervi 319. And, although we feel like we know all there is to know about Cervi 319, we sort of feel like you can just get a quick aerial view and there it is. What I wanted to clarify was this line of sight issue, at least in my own mind. Google Earth takes us right there, but we're still not there on the ground, as it were. From the air, the Cervi site is a roughly Y-shaped sort of clearing of Earth. So the actual area is very, there's an area where there are no plants. It's almost like a parking lot, but it is swept clean. It's kept very free of debris that could potentially catch fire or could, I guess, get caught in some of the infrastructure of the battery pad. The Y shape of Cervi 319 sort of looks like the tail of the Y is blowing to its left. The upper part of the Y-shaped site rests at a slight angle inside a kind of rectangular corridor. On either side of this cleared area are brown rocks and speckles of green bushes peppering the landscape. This was my best guess, that the contours of the area dipped down. So these areas of brown rock seem to me to suggest that there was some undulation, and that Cervi 319 is situated in a depression within a shallow valley amongst low hills. but the question remained, how shallow was this valley? The service road nearby would be Chris Watts' biggest concern. Could random strangers peek into or over the site while he was rushing about, barefoot, sometimes with his boots on, trying to get rid of 3 bodies? That's really the question we're asking. When you're talking about line of sight, the question we're really asking is, when Chris was on the ground, burying Shanann and also moving the bodies of his children, would he have been visible to someone a long distance away? And from the air, you would think that the answer is yes. From the air, you would say, well, yes, it's flat. You could see for miles. But I wanted to test this out on the ground. The Denver Post provides an unusual in situ shot of the site. Notice the power line to the right appears to correspond with the Google Earth screen grab. And according to the caption, the oil site is near Roggan. That puts us in the ballpark too. The Denver Post doesn't identify the image as the actual work site, but what it does do is locate the local topography from an on-the-ground perspective. It's clear that there are undulating hills, which you can see in the background, and a small amount of brush. These hills are higher and steeper than I'd perceived them to be from the satellite images. This confirms the Cervi 319 site must have been secluded in terms of line of sight from the surrounding hills. One of the reasons why I was so preoccupied with this idea of line of sight was around the time I wrote a book on the subject, I went to visit friends. They were getting married, and I was told that someone had been murdered in the vicinity. And kind of just getting back into the whole true crime thing, I went to the location, and it was sort of an area near beach, and I was very preoccupied with line of sight. And to be just quite clear, I actually initially misunderstood the location, and I just couldn't figure it out. I was like, why the hell would someone commit a crime here when you can be seen from there and then from across the river on that hillside? It just doesn't make any sense. And then it turned out that they hadn't been killed there, and then it was another location, and at that location it turned out you couldn't see anywhere. There was no houses visible from that particular section of the Strand. And so just because of that idea, that thinking, I brought that into the Watts case. And although you wouldn't actually think about it, you just think, well, he was by himself, so it wouldn't be relevant. It definitely was relevant because he knew his colleagues were on his way to see him, and he knew he had a limited amount of time and quite a lot of work ahead of him. And we're going to deal with that, the issues around when his work colleagues arrived and how they perceived him. Bear in mind, he's just spent 20 minutes digging a grave and also running up and down stairs and cleaning himself up, possibly also changing his clothing. I don't actually think he had time to change his clothing by the time they arrived, but I do think he changed it a little bit later. So we'll deal with Melissa Parrish a little bit later in this episode. Some people have recently shot drone footage at the well site, and what you see at the gate is you can't see straight towards the fracking pad. You sort of it's sort of almost like below ground level in parts. So you don't have a clear view of what is going on there. Does that make sense? And what that also raises is this question of where did Watts park? And we know his colleague said he parked in an unusual position, not where he would normally park. And why is that? Because he was I think to some extent trying to hide his truck away, but also wanting to park the truck near to where he needed to have the bodies, because it would take a longer time. It would take quite a lot of time to pick up Shanann's body and carry it if he could just drive it closer to where it needed to be. And it was some distance, her grave was some distance from the tanks where the children were. And now we deal with the next area in this analysis, the drive. I'm not going to go through the route. I will put a video where you can follow I will put a link to a video where you can follow the route to Cervi 319, where some people posted that journey on YouTube, and then you can check it out there. I'm not going to go into it in a lot of detail just because I've done it so many times. I'm not going to go through it on Google Maps or anything like that just because I have done that. In the past, I've certainly covered it on Crime Rocket quite a few times, provided maps and all sorts of things. The only thing I do want to bring up is the fact that Watts crossed the River Platte, and that could have been a disposal site, especially if the river was flowing. So in other words, he could have still hidden the crime to some extent within the movement of going to on a normal work day. The only issue is if it stopped on the bridge, the GPS probably would have shown that. So that's probably why that idea fell by the wayside. So I did ask the question in the beginning, what was the length of time it should have taken to do the drive, and how long did Watts take to get back from Cervi 319 after he said to Nicole, okay, I'm on my way. And there's an important detail hidden within that question in terms of the answer. Okay, now we're going to deal with the sandy substrate. Basically, there's not much to say except that the whole area is kind of very sandy. It's not hard soil. It is a kind of it's almost got a geological what do you call it, characteristic of like a salt pan, but that is covered in not a salt pan but a sandy pan, which may have previously been a lake, and that makes sense given that there's oil underneath. So when I did do research into the area, there were large areas that were marsh, sort of marshlands, prehistorically, and but for many years that they were marshlands, and that seems to be how these chemicals formed in this particular area. Now, in terms of the sandy substrate, because of the sandy substrate, you have these gentle undulations. So that is lending itself to a geology where there's like a sly and deceptive way that Watts can be on location and not be seen. The only way he can really be seen in a vivid way or in a clear way from a distance is if he's driving and your truck leaves a dust trail. That's going to show someone's in the area. Of course, very early in the morning, you're unlikely to see that. It's likely Watts thought of things like that. Before we continue with the location of the fitted sheet and the human hair, I think that is going to be it for the folks on YouTube. If you want to listen to the remainder of this video, please head on to Patreon. That's Patreon/TCRS, and it'll be on the $2 tier. The audiobooks are on the $5 tier, so go and check it out. And let's